Tony D and Little Joan with a screenwriter's take on The Substance, starring Demi Moore as a woman who wants to stay young, Dennis Quaid as the executive, and what's a hot chick's name? Quali, I think, or Quayle, as the younger version of Demi Moore. So, as always, I'm going to go through a film by Coralie Fargeat. I'm going to go through the non-spoiler review, and then I'm going to give you my spoiler review. So the non-spoiler review is this. This movie is a Twilight Zone episode that goes on for about, I'm going to say, 30 minutes too long. Right, Little Joan? Little Joan didn't say it, but Joan, don't mess up my suit. Don't mess up my suit. Okay, here, put your paws here. So, it's fine, you know, in terms of a story. It's actually a pretty good story. But eventually, they kind of run out of runway, and the inevitable ending, they just keep putting off. There was a couple of moments where they could have done some interesting things with the characters, but they kind of just don't do it. You know, let's see. So, for instance, there's a moment in which let's see what the runtime was. I'm going to say, I'll tell you, it felt long because they seemed to stretch it out. 2 hours and 21 minutes. Ah, that is way too long. This movie should have been a tight 90. 100%. 100% should have been a tight 90. And here's the fitness girl. Yeah, that's Quayle? What's her name? Quali? Margaret Qualley. Yeah. Pretty much a smoke show. And there are a couple of just inconsistencies overall in the movie, but mostly it's just too long. It's just way too friggin' long. You cut this movie to 90 minutes, yeah, it could have been cool at 90 minutes. At 2 hours and 21 minutes, no wonder I was begging for this movie to end. Just way too long. They waste a lot of time in things that are unnecessary. But again, it is a Twilight Zone movie about aging, about women, and they beat you over the head with the message that men set up unrealistic beauty standards that women have to live up to. Yeah, bang, bang, bang. Yeah, we get it. Yeah, got that from like the opening scene, basically. Well, let me get into the details. So, would I recommend this movie? That's a tough one because it starts out really good, you know? It's very tight in terms of the setup. It just the second act goes on forever, and the third act is just unforgivably long. The third act should have been like 10 minutes. And then the second act should have been cut down. Like the first act's about, I'm going to say 20 minutes, right? Now that leaves the second act, which should have been roughly 40 minutes. It's more like an hour. And then the third act should have been 10 minutes. 10 minutes flat. It's just a lot of long shots of things that we already know what's happening. So let me get into details to explain myself. All right, so that concludes the non-spoiler review. And now, spoilers ahoy, Joan. Spoilers ahoy. All right, I'm going to set you down for this so I can concentrate. All right. So, the first act, Demi Moore hosts a fitness show. I know what you're saying. Fitness show? What year does this movie take place? At first, I thought, well, maybe it takes place in the 80s, which would make a lot of sense because I lived in the 80s. And back in the 80s, we had fitness shows, and There were always hot girls on them. And they lasted till roughly the 2000s. And then, by that time, they weren't any big deal. Now you could see a fitness show on any local affiliate anywhere, and they're just not that big of a deal, TV-wise. And television itself is going away to the dodo. So they put up this TV show as like a hot thing, starring Demi Moore's character Elizabeth Sparkle. And the movie opens with Elizabeth Sparkle getting a star on the Walk of Fame, which also doesn't make any sense because usually that's just reserved for movie stars. Occasionally TV stars get it, but it's rare. They have to be like super famous. So like the whole Elizabeth Sparkle getting a TV star and they S-can her from her own show that's so popular, that doesn't make any sense. Somebody who would have gotten a star on the Walk of Fame for having a TV show would have been so insanely famous for that TV show, they would never let her retire. She would have to retire. But the plot of the movie requires that big, manly executive played by Dennis Quaid kick her off the show for a younger girl. Yeah. So you can hear the patriarchy being fought in this movie all throughout the script. And it's a shame because you didn't need that. You absolutely 100% didn't need that. And blaming the unrealistic beauty standards of women on men, have you met women? Have you met women? First off, Demi Moore is still hot. Somehow, the angel of aging never stops by her door. She looks great. I don't know, what is she like? She's approaching 70. She might even be 70. I don't know. She looks great. She's got like a Linda Carter thing going on where she's going to look good until she finally hits the wall at like 85. I mean, so yes, I mean, if you really look close, you could see some lines on Demi's face, but Demi Moore, for her age, she looks amazing. So it made it a harder sell for this entire concept by even casting her. But kudos to Demi Moore for being able to sort of send up herself and being willing to get in a lot of crazy costumes. So I got to give her some credit. She's pretty good in this. Dennis Quaid, however, is definitely miscast. And here's why. Dennis Quaid is supposed to be playing a sexist, cartoony version of an executive. The problem is this show exists in the modern age, and those executives are long gone. I mean, they haven't been around for like 30, 40 years. Back in the 80s, we had shows like this, and there were hot girls, and you'd watch them. In the 90s, we still had them. They're kind of fading out a little bit. They'd gotten old hat, but yeah, there were still girls running around in bikinis and tight outfits. By the 2000s, it really started to slow down, but we still had enough of them. We didn't complain. Plus, we started to have, stuff on the internet, and you can see anything you want on the internet. And just in general, people stopped watching TV. Sometime around 2010, 2012, it all ground to a halt. Now, most of us straight heterosexual men didn't fret. We still had the internet, but we were like, wonder what's going on with TV. Doesn't seem to be any bikini girls anymore. And then suddenly around 2014, 2015, it was like, oh, yeah, we're not going to have that anymore. Like, why the hell not? I mean, you're trying to kill TV? And haven't seen nudity in a horror movie or anything else ever since. It seems to be that, like, beauty standards, instead of just sort of scaling them back a little bit to something more realistic like they were in the late 90s, they instead decided, we'll show you men. We're going to put fat chicks on the cover of Sports Illustrated, and we're going to put ugly chicks in Victoria's Secret. What do you think of that? Well, as you can see what happened over the last few years, you see what do we think of that. We don't think much of it, which is why all these businesses are in trouble. And, they say it's get woke, go broke, but as Razorfist says, it's actually get broke, get woke, then croak. But I digress. So when you're doing a satire of an evil executive and it's 2024 and it's not a woman, you're not doing a satire of an executive because they're all women now. 99% of the Hollywood elites now are women. And they greenlight movies like The Substance, and they, kick everybody to the curb who's even remotely sexist. So the satire here is from like 30, 40 years ago. So 30, 40 years ago, you made this movie, it would have been like, wow. Now you make it and it's like, oh. And Dennis Quaid, not for nothing, I think he's a good actor, but he's not mean enough. He doesn't have that mean streak. He just doesn't have it. I have a meaner streak than not Randy Quaid, Dennis Quaid. I could have played that role because I can be a prick. But Dennis Quaid? Nah. He comes off as a guy playing a prick. He's just not mean enough. He just wasn't. He didn't really give it to her. He didn't. If they'd shot this thing back in the 80s, I'll tell you exactly what would have happened. The Dennis Quaid character would have tried to have sex with the Demi Moore character, probably would have been having sex with her as part of their deal, and then immediately would have thrown her over to get Margaret Qualley's character, and then he would have been looking to bang her. Except that doesn't happen. So there wasn't enough of a mean streak for me to even believe Dennis Quaid. Then there's the substance, and the substance part's really cool. Like, it's very mysterious how it all comes about. Although realistically, Demi Moore's character in the first act, she realizes she gets fired from her fitness show because she's too old, and so she ends up in a car accident because she's looking at her own billboard being torn down, and ends up in the hospital, and the guy in the hospital gives her the contact info for the substance because he's using it, and he looks weirdly young. And he's got this weird sore on his wrist, and it comes from all the IVs he's getting, which later you find out is due to taking the substance all the time. So the deal with the substance, again, spoilers, is that you take the substance, the activator, and it creates a second, younger version of you. However, the limitation is every 7 days, you have to switch back into your old body. So you can only be young for like a week. And it's not really you, it's like another you, although it is you. And each one needs the other because the young you needs the stabilizer, which they get from extracting it from your spine, ouch, and giving themselves 7 days of stabilizer injections. But after that, you need to switch back so the old you can regenerate some spinal fluid, I guess. After 7 days, then you go back and the younger person can run around and do whatever. But of course, the younger version of you doesn't listen to instructions. Lets things go on too long, and then you get some necrosis. So first, Demi gets it in her finger, and she calls the number, and then they're like, oh yeah, you can't reverse that. And then young Demi Moore gets a big break and really extends it too far, and now like Demi Moore looks like a troll. And because she really aged her, and now she calls the substance line again. The guy's like, well, you can stop it, you can't reverse it, but you can stop any further progress. And Demi Moore still can't stop because Margaret Qualley is creating something in her that she desperately needs, and that's attention. So really, Demi Moore's character is just sort of quietly pathetic. It's not until finally on the final transfer where Margaret Qualley tries to literally extract every drop of spinal fluid that finally she's like, oh crap, I can't keep doing this, because she has to switch back and get the juice back, get the spinal fluid back. And then, Demi Moore's like, I want to stop. But even Demi Moore can't kill her younger self, because even Demi Moore loves hot Margaret Qualley. And then somehow she ends up waking her up, and then they both fight, and then Margaret Qualley kills Demi Moore and then tries to go on to do her New Year's Eve special, which is a big part of the plot, and then starts falling apart during the New Year's Eve special. And of course, the initial instructions said take the activator, but you can only take it once and you have to throw away the rest. But the substance people gave her enough activator to give her a second shot, which she never threw away. So she tries a second shot of activator, which then, and this is where it goes off the rails, creates a third version of Demi Moore. But this version is just a total monster and doesn't look good at all. And then she shows up at the New Year's Eve special and freaks out everybody and starts falling apart and bleeding all over the audience. Like, it looked like something out of if you've ever seen the band Gwar and they bleed all over the audience and shoot fake blood into the audience, that's exactly what happens in this movie. It's totally over the top crazy, and she keeps sort of regenerating. And then there's a final bit where Demi Moore's face has been frozen on the back of this weird creature, and the weird creature, her leg explodes and she falls over and the whole body falls apart, but the face of Demi Moore crawls away somehow, gets to her star on the Walk of Fame, and then dissolves into it. And then a street cleaner comes by and wipes her away, and that's the end of the movie. So a little too hard in the paint on the message, which is, men and unrealistic beauty standards, because all the men here are jerks, right? So her neighbor's a jerk because at first he's mad about the noise going on in her apartment, and then Margaret Qualley opens the door and he's like, oh, hey, baby. I'm not mad at you. You're too hot to be mad at. I'm pretty sure if Demi Moore opened the door, he'd have virtually the same reaction. Oh, Demi Moore, hey. You do whatever you want, beautiful. I mean, let's be honest. Margaret Qualley is a smoke show, but Demi Moore ain't no slouch. So that kind of throws the movie off a little bit. Like, the kind of person they needed for the Demi Moore part should have been first off, her character should have been an actress, right? It could have been someone like Susan Sarandon. Like, Susan Sarandon back in the day was fairly good looking. She wasn't a total smoke show like Demi Moore, but back in the day she looked good, and that she was in the movies. That would have made more sense with the Walk of Fame. It would have made more sense with her career, and it should have been the typical thing where the agent's like, listen, they just want to cast a younger woman. Yeah, you could play the grandma. Like, no, I want to play the romantic lead, which, by the way, still wouldn't even be realistic because they're casting grandmas all over the place. I mean, did you see this movie with, was it Diane Keaton, Kathy Bates, I think Susan Sarandon, and Bette Midler? And they all go to a summer camp. Now all have old people sex. Yeah. So this isn't even really Hollywood today. It's just not. So that's why the satire kind of doesn't work. Now, as a monster movie, it's not too bad. I kind of enjoyed a lot of it. But the scenes, the movie kind of weirdly makes you hate nudity, because the nudity, although super high quality, I mean, you get to see Demi Moore naked. Again, older Demi Moore, but not too slouchy. Then you get to see Margaret Qualley naked, and then you're like, all right, now we got a movie. But there's also a lot of ridiculously bloody scenes that make it kind of not as sexy. But the thing is, it's like, as a monster movie, it's not bad. Like, if they had just stuck with the monster movie aspect, had this just been a woman who was a total narcissist and wanted to stay young just because, not because men wanted her to, just because of her own ego, that would have made more sense. And they actually tried to push some of that in the movie, because That's why Demi Moore gets into the car accident to begin with. She's looking at her own damn billboard being torn down, and she hates it. But the idea that a woman this famous would just get S-can like this doesn't make any sense. It just doesn't make any sense. You could have done a thing where everybody was being, they're trying to make it a big send-up, but it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. It's not on point with the current zeitgeist, basically. Maybe if this had been on point with that, right? If this had been like 2024 and everybody's going on and on about girl bosses and women of color and DEI and all that nonsense, then I would have been like, okay, this is modern Hollywood. I can't even buy this. This is like Hollywood from the 1980s with cell phones. And that's my main gripe with it. There's some scenes where she has sex, and it's just like, there's no characterization here as part of the problem. The only character, she runs into an old friend of hers from homeroom in 10th grade who's, enamored with her and wants to take her out for a drink after all these years. Fred is his name. And he gives her, he's kind of a bumbling nincompoop, and gives Demi Moore his number. And then later she calls him up for a date, but she can't get out the door because she keeps seeing Margaret Qualley on a billboard outside her window, and like it's never good enough, which is an interesting scene. Like that scene I did like because it was about how she's really insecure, but they didn't play up that enough. And in fact, I wanted to see her eventually go out, meet Fred for a drink, and realize that she could have a relationship and a life outside of her empty world of narcissism. Like, I would have liked to have seen her do that, and then one of two things could have happened. Either she's then realizes, oh, I could have this great life dating Fred. It wouldn't be the life I had, but it would be a good life, a wholesome life. And then for whatever reason, she decides, I can't kill Margaret Qualley, so I'm going to write her a letter saying, hey, I want us to figure out a better system here so you and I can get along. And then Margaret Qualley screws her, and now she won't have a life with Fred because now she really looks all effed up. And then, then she has to, go after Margaret Qualley. The other version could have been she goes out on a date with Fred and realizes that she misses her empty narcissistic world where everybody, fawned all over her. And like Fred's kind of fawning all over her, but that's not enough. Like that would have been cool too. But they don't develop that. They just sort of, she doesn't go on the date, and that's the end of that. So it focuses a little too much on Margaret Qualley, which is weird to say because she's such a smoke show. And they keep showing like clips of her ridiculous show, which shouldn't be that famous. Because of that, you're actually bored with that because that's not where the action in this movie is. The action is whether or not Margaret is going to switch back into Demi on time, or is she going to extend it extra days and screw Demi Moore. And eventually she does. So I think the problem with the movie is, A, it's way too long. If you cut it back, maybe focus on the characters a little more and less on this idea of like, oh yeah, we got to take this to another level. Another version of this movie, could have been that Demi Moore's character is just terrible, just god awful, and deserves everything she gets. So that kind of comes across in this. In which case, why did I just spend 2.5 hours watching the damn movie? It's just too long. But because it's a Twilight Zone movie, you want to give people hope that somewhere inside Demi Moore there's a good person, but for maybe it's been just too many years of her narcissism that she can't find herself anymore. That to me would have been more poignant. Or you had the Margaret Qualley character and maybe develop her in some way. Maybe she's the evil version of Demi Moore and does have to be terminated. But when Demi tries to kill her, and they do this a little bit in the movie. When Demi tries to kill her, she changes her mind and then sort of half asses it, and then Margaret wakes up. You could have done something like that and felt bad for both of them, I think. And they kind of tried to do that, but it doesn't really work, and it happens too late in the movie. They waste a ridiculous amount of time on the show. Scenes with Dennis Quaid are almost pointless. Another thing they do is they surround him by old white men in suits like this one, and they pretend like this is the way studio executives are. I mean, it's supposed to be a cartoonish version of studio execs, but again, it just doesn't play today. Have you seen the diversity rainbow that is the Disney executives? I mean, that's the way it is now. And, we've been beaten over the head by that. So the idea that you're still beating this dead horse of, oh, poor women, we have to listen to men. Nah, it just doesn't sit well with me. And the ending is just so insanely ridiculous. I'm not exactly sure what they're going for. It goes on forever. The blood just squirting out of the third incarnation of Demi Moore. It's just bizarre. It's supposed to be a New Year's Eve special. For some reason, there's an entire studio audience for it of mostly old people, a couple of kids for some reason. Dennis Quaid is in the audience, and Dennis Quaid's reaction in the audience isn't one of horror. It's more like, oh, I got blood all over me. It's weird. The whole movie's weird, really. I would have liked a little more info on the movie. Another thing, too, is Demi Moore plays 503. That's her assigned number for the substance exchange. And then she gets to these mailboxes, and the only other mailbox with a number is 207, which turns out to be the guy who, forwarded her info. And, they're the only patients. It doesn't make any sense. Doesn't make any sense. And when she gets to this diner and he's there, I thought perhaps they were going to explain, like, well, this is where all the old people who do the substance hang out. But I think it kind of suggested that. I think there was another person with the same wound on his hand. But the mailboxes should have had numbers all over them. The other problem, too, is when Margaret Qualley is supposed to be the younger version of Demi Moore, but she doesn't look enough like Demi Moore. I mean, they show pictures of young Demi Moore in the movie. Like, if they had shown young pictures of Demi Moore and it was Margaret Qualley's face on it, then you would have been like, oh, okay. Then when, Demi Moore turns young, or her young version crawls out of her skin, you would have been like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Instead, it's like, okay, Margaret Qualley now is a different person. And why doesn't anybody recognize young Demi Moore as being Elizabeth? Because they all worked with her for years and years and years. Doesn't make any sense. It's like these people don't have a memory. So, and there's a lot of wasted time with Demi Moore making food or sitting around watching TV. And that upsets Margaret Qualley for some reason. What I thought would happen is Demi Moore would eat all the food and get fat. And then when she switched back to Margaret Qualley would realize, oh no, I have to lose some weight. And then she'd get mad because now she has to do twice as much work. But again, missed opportunity. So overall, I can't really recommend The Substance. I just kind of can't. I can understand why there was a lot of buzz on this movie, probably because most of the movie executives are female, and this would have resonated with them. And it kind of resonated with me because I know the business a little bit, and I know it's often very hard on women because they want young women, because that's the look that everybody likes, women and men. But it's an exaggeration. The movie is like grossly exaggerating and should have concentrated more on character, I believe. But it's not, it's not the worst movie ever made. Um, so that's a backhanded compliment. So for those of you who are movie files, I think you would find it interesting. I found it interesting. But its flaws, I wouldn't recommend it to the average normie. I think the average normie, they'll have the reaction, it was kind of a gross movie for no reason. You know what I mean? It could have been the gross movie, but it had lots of reasons. Like the Dennis Quaid shrimp scene kind of doesn't do anything. Like, okay, it's gross. I'm not sure what that's supposed to portray, other than that Dennis Quaid is avoiding talking to Demi Moore about why he fired her. Because if you had that conversation, and it's 2024 or 2023 or whenever it was, yeah, Demi Moore would be suing him. I think the Demi Moore character would have sued him anyway, rather than, inject herself with an experimental fluid she got in a dark alley. That's the other thing, too. Demi Moore gets the address for the substance, and one look at it, I think, somebody who was supposedly worldwide famous had a star on the Walk of Fame. I'm pretty sure she would have walked right the hell out of there if she had gotten that far at all. But not only does she get there and then scan her card, but then the door doesn't open all the way and she has to duck under the thing to get in. Yeah, it doesn't really scan. I mean, I kind of liked it, but I think it should have been, again, a different actress. Someone like somebody who looked really her age. That's why I said Susan Sarandon, because she definitely looks her age. Trying to think of somebody. Well, Diane Keaton for one. I don't. She wouldn't have done this movie, but Diane Keaton definitely looks her age. There's a few others. Even Pamela Anderson might have been able to pull this off. She's not a very good actress, though. Maybe not. Oh gosh, Nicole Eggert, who's recently in the news because of her cancer, but she definitely doesn't look the same. Somebody who does, Kelly McGinnis. All those women would have been. You could see that they were old, but they wanted somebody who, was still pretty hot, but just getting old, just hitting that wall. And I think you needed somebody else. Demi Moore is like, again, she's like on the Linda Carter spectrum. She has always looked good through 90% of her career. It's only like maybe in the next 5 years she might finally start to show her age, to the point at which you'll go, oh yeah, she's starting to look a little old. But like, there's been so many other women who, it's not that they're bad looking, it's just that they're finally starting to look their age, or they're looking older. Not everybody could have the genes of a Demi Moore, but I mean, I get what she's trying to do. And it's a shame, had you cut, I think you needed to cut 50 minutes from this thing. I really do. If you had cut this down to a tight 90, I think this movie would have been spot on, because it would have gotten its message across and gotten out without beating you over the head with it. And let me tell you something. This message is boom, 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 every frame of this film. And so anyhow, that's The Substance. What did I watch it on? Oh, Amazon. My girlfriend rented it on Amazon, so she sort of watched it, but hadn't watched it all the way through. So then we watched it together. Yeah. I mean, you can rent it on, Amazon if you want to check it out. Anyhow, that's it for me, Tony D and Little Joan. Check us out on all our various channels: the green channel, the orange channel, and the black channel. For more videos. I will be back with more videos later. Check me out on Saturday and Sunday. I'll be doing various winter events in December. Hope to see you there. We'll see you in the next one.